In this episode of Ottawa Business Journal's Behind the Headlines, Ottawa's film industry soars to new heights, a fresh look at the local cannabis market, and an Ottawa entrepreneur looks to shake up home buyers' purchase properties. All this and more coming up right now. Behind the Headlines is brought to you by Nelligan Law. Their profession is the law, their product is peace of mind. Hello and welcome to Behind the Headlines for the week of August 16th, 2021. I'm Michael Curran from the Ottawa Business Journal. Behind the Headlines is a regular podcast from OBJ to explore the most popular local business stories. As usual, I'm happy to be joined by two of my colleagues from OBJ. Here is Peter Kavesi and David Sally. Welcome to you both. Listen, we're going to get right into story number one. As I teased, it's about the local film industry. And when you typically think film in Canada, you think Toronto, you think Montreal, you think Vancouver. But here in Ottawa, and we've been saying this for a few years, so hopefully it's coming true, there's a burgeoning local film and television industry. The Ottawa Film Office recently calculated that live action dramatic productions generated a record number. It's 15.8 million, so pretty significant for the city's economy during the first half of 2021. That's 12% up, by the way, in the same period from 2019. And we've had some international networks, including Lifetime, Oprah Winfrey, Network Hallmark film productions. That's my favorite, by the way, guys. In Ottawa, I'm big on those Hallmark movies. Anyway, Peter, setting all the jokes aside, set the stage for us, as they say. Why is Ottawa becoming an attractive place to make movies and TV?
So Ottawa does have some unique advantages over some of those bigger cities that you mentioned. Those within the industry often point to geography and geographic diversity as one of the city's big selling points, along with its affordability. So, I think any resident of Ottawa, if they think about it, would agree that Ottawa has a neat mix of both modern and historic buildings, as well as those picturesque waterways, as well as the nearby villages. And what that means to the film industry is that Ottawa can stand in for a whole bunch of different locations and in four unique or distinct seasons as well. So here's just one recent example. In a recent production, Ottawa stood in for Atlanta in a film that was going to be airing on the Oprah Winfrey Network. One other advantage that Ottawa has is that it's relatively easy for crews to move around the city. You can be in an urban part of Ottawa and be in a completely rural part in 30 minutes. The same thing can't be said for some of those other major cities. A couple other advantages that Ottawa has: we've got a great pool of labor that's produced in part through Algonquin College, and something that's really getting the industry excited is the prospect of a dedicated sound stage that's been, earmarked for around the Woodruff and Hunt Club Road area. Advocates say this is going to be so significant because it's going to really make Ottawa more attractive to some of those big dollar dramatic productions that need to construct their own set. And we're expecting construction to start on that sound stage sometime next year.
Dave, let's not forget we're in a pandemic, and the pandemic has messed things up big time for production studios. In fact, I think a lot of films and TV production ground to a halt. What are you hearing about how the pandemic is affecting the industry?
Well, I mean, it certainly has. It did throw a bit of a wrench into production there for a while, no doubt about it. But now, things are starting to ramp up again. You're seeing that here around town. People, producers are basically trying to film in a safe way, make sure that they adhere to all the protocols. But it absolutely, the demand for content just keeps fueling production. I mean, we can't stop when you've got all these services: Netflix, Apple Plus, Disney Plus, you name it, streaming services that have just exploded in popularity during the pandemic. You need to feed the beast. They need content. That's what producers are here to do. Fill that need for new content, and it does provide a big boost here too, right, for the local economy in other ways. I mean, you think of not just what, you're bringing in, you're hiring crews, that sort of thing, but they're spending money at hotels and restaurants and whatnot. They're visiting the city, so it generates spin-offs in a lot of other ways as well. About 40 to 60% of film budgets, according to the Ottawa Film Office, are spent on local goods and services. That we're talking about a $100 million, basically $100 million boost to the local economy every year. So that's not an insignificant amount of money, and they only keep expecting that number to grow over the years to come.
Well, I'm expecting more Hallmark movies, so they got to keep me happy. Thanks, Dave, for that. And that I never realized that's an interesting stat, by the way, the 100 million to the amount that's being spent locally. Let's go to story number 2, and I'm really intrigued about this one too. If you're like me, you walk around the city, you drive down around the city. And what do you see? You see new retail cannabis shops popping up everywhere, like weeds. Let's play on words. And I always wonder, how are these businesses doing? Like, how can there be more and more and more of them? A little bit of a clue. So the provincial government recently shared a snapshot of retail cannabis sales in Ottawa. So that's a really kind of interesting number. So local retailers apparently sold 1.7 million grams of pot in the first quarter of 2021. So that's a 3-month period, of course. And that added up to about 13 million in sales. So, Peter, give us a little bit of a closer look at these numbers.
Yeah, so I was also fascinated by the numbers and what it says about the local business opportunities. So just for a bit of context, consumers who are looking to purchase cannabis legally largely have 2 options. They can either purchase it directly from the Ontario Cannabis Store, which is a Crown corporation that sells pot online, or they can go to one of these brick and mortar locations, which just confuse things more. Also, all getting into e-commerce, but those stores that you referenced. So basically, two distinct options. So that $13 million figure, that's just those brick and mortar stores, those private retailers. What I found really interesting about that $13 million figure, which is the quarterly sales, is that it's been at more or less at that level for a year. So the amount of revenue that these stores are collectively bringing in Ottawa has been relatively stagnant over the last few quarters. But at the same time, the number of stores here in Ottawa has been multiplying. According to the government statistics, Ottawa went from 7 licensed retailers in the first quarter of 2020 to 28 in the same period this year. And of course, as you mentioned, just anecdotally from walking around, I think it's safe to say that the number has increased even further in the last few months since those numbers were compiled. And we also know there's even more stores in the pipeline that have submitted an application for regulatory review. They're awaiting their license. So what these numbers are suggesting is that the size of the market has stayed relatively constant over the past year, even as more and more businesses try to capture a share of that market, which leads to the question, is the market approaching a saturation point? Our colleague Caroline Phillips explored that question as part of a much larger feature, a couple of months ago, and she uncovered a bit of nuance to that question. So one of them is that location is becoming increasingly important for cannabis retailers. So you could easily make the argument that in central Ottawa, the market for cannabis retail is getting a little bit congested, but at the same time, there are still some underserved communities in some of Ottawa's suburban neighborhoods. It's also fair to note that some within the industry have noted that we don't talk about other industries in the same way. I don't recall OBJ ever having a debate about whether or not Ottawa's restaurant industry is reaching a saturation point. One of Ottawa's first licensed cannabis retailers, Mimi Lang, who's the CEO of Superette, she argued it's pretty simple. If there's too many cannabis shops in certain neighborhoods, the market's going to correct itself, and that eventually we are going to reach a bit of a balance point. In saying all that, I think there's 2 really, really important caveats, though, to add to this story. So the first one is the COVID-19 pandemic. It has affected all retailers, really upended the things. And even when you look at the quarter by quarter numbers, you do see a little bit of fluctuation. So during those periods when COVID-19 cases were high and we were all encouraged to stay at home, the sales numbers did slip. But then during periods where cases were a bit lower and we're more people out and about, the sales figures did climb a little bit higher. So again, been a very unusual year for retail. There's an even bigger caveat, though. Across the entire province, the Ontario Cannabis Store estimates that the legal channels, so the online government store as well as its private partners, are only capturing 44% of the market, meaning that the majority of cannabis being consumed in Ontario is still coming from the black market sources. So if that segment of the market could be enticed to switch to the licensed producers buying their cannabis legally, then all of a sudden the market is, could effectively double, creating a lot more opportunities for these private retailers.
So listen, Peter and Dave, we're going to put you on hold for a second before we explore our last story of the day. I want to bring in our legal expert from Nelligan Law, Malini Vijay Kumar, an associate lawyer in the firm's employment and labor practice groups. Welcome to the show, Malini.
Thank you for having me, Michael. It's great to be here.
Thank you. Yeah, you're very welcome. We're happy to have you. Listen, I think we're going to talk about one of the hottest issues, particularly if you're an employer. There's no escape from this pandemic, let's face it. The issue, of course, is mandatory vaccines, especially as it relates to employment law. And I think this issue was thrust back onto the radar recently when the Prime Minister suggested that the Clerk of the Privy Council take a look at making vaccinations mandatory for both federal employees and employees in federally regulated industries. I think that shocked a little bit of people because most employers are uncertain what they can be asking. But let's just take a look and get you to weigh in on the Prime Minister's request of the Clerk of the Privy Council as it relates to federal employees. What's your thoughts on that?
Yeah, so what the Prime Minister is basically doing here is sort of twofold. Number one, if we're talking about employees in the federal public service, so people who are actually employees of the federal government, a lot of us here in Ottawa, that would be done by way of Treasury Board policy. So Treasury Board would institute a workplace policy saying, employees have to be vaccinated in order to come to the workplace or something like that. And then if we're talking about federally regulated industries more broadly, outside of the federal public service, we're talking about employees in perhaps the airline, broadcast radio, trucking industries, et cetera. And so what the Prime Minister seems to be after there is potentially an amendment to the regulations under the Canada Labour Code, which has provisions about, employers' duty to ensure health and safety in the workplace. So that's the process I think he would follow there.
That's such an important distinction, by the way, because, when I first heard that, I was thinking federal public servants. And of course, federal public servants are direct employees of the federal government. But you're making that distinction to federally regulated industries. Airlines, so Air Canada, for example, would be a good example of it. So that's really important for us to think about. He was saying something much more broad than maybe I or other people picked up on. I think, Malini, it would be correct to say that most businesses are not federally regulated. They come under provincial regulations. So if the Prime Minister is suggesting that they have the right to insist on mandatory vaccination, is the same true for businesses that would be under the provincial jurisdiction?
Yeah, that's a really good distinction, Michael, because you're right. The majority of people don't work in industries like airline, broadcast, radio, trucking, et cetera. Chances are, if you're working in private industry, you're actually probably in a provincially regulated workplace. So the regulations that the federal government passes under the Canada Labour Code won't apply to you. It's up to actually the province, of whatever province you live in, to come up with their own regulations under their own provincial workplace health and safety legislation.
And just as we wrap up here, Malini, maybe I'll put you on the spot with this one. So, the Clerk of the Privy Council was instructed to go do some research. When they come back, do you think that the federal government will be permitted to impose mandatory vaccinations?
I think they're definitely going to face some opposition. We're going to have to see how they do it. but they're probably going to face some opposition. For example, under the charter, I could see a rule like that coming up against some charter challenges and maybe some federal human rights challenges as well. So we'll really have to see how that shakes out. It's all very unprecedented.
Thanks, Malini, for joining us today and sharing those insights.
Thank you.
And thanks to Nelligan for its ongoing support of Behind the Headlines. Listen, guys, we're going to go to our third and final story. We have often talked about the hot residential home market. It's well known. Now a local entrepreneur, though, is launching a new venture that can shake things up into how home buyers purchase properties. The company name is called Unreserved, and it's an online auction platform that allows home buyers to buy properties in real time, and the business guarantees a minimum sales price for the seller. So this is really intriguing. Its founder says he's on the cusp of also landing the largest seed round of financing in Canadian tech history. Dave, give us a little bit about the backstory here.
Yeah, Mike. Well, this is a really interesting story, as you say. I mean, we're all, I'm sure, familiar in one way or another with online auction platforms. They've been around for cars for quite some time. And in fact, the man behind Unreserved actually launched the fastest growing online car auction platform in Canada right now, a company called eBlock, which last year made the Globe and Mail. It was number 30, in fact, on the Globe and Mail's list of Canada's top 400 fastest growing companies. So that tells you what the kind of demand in that sphere was. And that's where Ryan O'Connor, the founder of eBlock and Unreserved, that was sort of his background. He himself has kind of an interesting backstory. He was a competitive boxer, grew up outside of Ottawa, tried out for the Olympic team to go to Sydney for the 2000 games, just missed, lost in the trials there. So gone into business. And since then, he has become quite a successful entrepreneur. After getting eBlock off the ground, growing it into what it's become today, a multi-million-dollar enterprise, he launched Unreserved, saying, he was always thinking, why couldn't we do the same thing for the housing industry? And we all know how red hot the industry is right now. And one of the problems that O'Connor said he saw was that, when you're bidding on houses, you're kind of doing it blindly. You're submitting a bid and you're hoping it gets accepted, and you're hoping you might get to make a counter bid, but that may not happen. There's all kinds of can be frustrations there. So he wanted to come up with a system where we're gonna get to see. It'll be fully transparent. Everybody can see what the other bids are, and that's what happens in Unreserved. It's literally there's a set time period for the auction. They get 2 independent appraisers to appraise each property to come up with a minimum value for the property. The online auction occurs. You have a certain amount of time to match or beat a bid before it closes. And here's the interesting thing, like you kind of mentioned, they guarantee a minimum price to the seller. So if, let's say, you've got a house on the minimum bid is $560,000, or the minimum price on the website, that's the guaranteed minimum. If it only ends up selling for $530,000, say, Unreserved will cut the seller a check for $30,000 to make up the difference. They've already had to do that once. They've sold 4 houses, and on one of them, they did have to do that, make up the difference. And they take a 1% auction fee. Now, when you compare that with the average commission for a realtor takes on a house transaction, which is 4 to 5%, that can be quite a savings for the buyers. So can mean quite a difference as well for the seller. So he thinks there's going to be quite a market for this. So much so that he's been talking to investors, and he says he's looking to, and it's looking quite promising that they're going to get, as he put it, north of $20 million in a seed round over the next couple of months, which he says would probably be the biggest seed round in Canadian tech history. He says, investors are calling every day to get in on this. And they've actually just recently, as of last week, they brought on board Simon Dean as their chairman of the board. He is the former CEO of Royal LePage, and he helped turn that company around in the late 90s and early 2000s, really grew its revenues. And O'Connor says he's just a wealth of knowledge and is really keen about scaling up unreserved. And for now, it's focusing on the National Capital Region, but it expects to move into the GTA early next year, and then Vancouver later next year. So O'Connor really feels that he's on the verge of something big here, duplicating the kind of success he had with E-Block. And even though, the housing market may be showing a few signs of cooling off right now, Mike, he still thinks there's plenty of a market for this. And because, anybody who's looked at the figures in Ottawa the last few months, there are sales going on. There's still bidding wars happening. So it's going to be really interesting to watch and see how unreserved grows over the next few years.
We built Shopify. Why can't we build unreserved? But let me just check something with you, Dave. So I just want to make sure I get this straight, and people watching or listening to the podcast get this straight. So I'm a home seller. I sign up with unreserved. They do a double appraisal, come up with a price, and then people can still go visit the house, right? You can still do it. You can visit it physically. You don't have to just look at pictures.
If you wanted to, they have a very, the website is, if you go on there, they've got multiple pictures of each room. They break it down. It's a pretty good virtual tour. Okay. And the other interesting element I do want to mention, this is, they actually guarantee they essentially, they'll say, look, they inspect each house too. Each house gets fully inspected. And if something happens within the first year of the purchase, say the roof suddenly starts leaking, needs $50,000 in repairs, they will guarantee they'll cover that up to $100,000 with a $5,000 deductible for the first year. That type of work, whether it's a roof, foundation, mold removal, anything like that, anything unforeseen. So it's really interesting. Kind of model.
Well, it seems well thought out. So, I'm really intrigued to keep watching this story. So thanks for that reporting, David. And Peter, we're going to wrap up now, but tell us what OBJ is working on in terms of projects or other initiatives.
So we're currently working on one of our biggest projects of the year, which is the research for our annual Book of Lists. So if you've never seen it before, this is a directory of hundreds. We usually publish contact information for more than 600 companies organized by a variety of sectors. It's one of our most popular publications. Even in the age of Google, as we like to say, there is no substitute for this authoritative guide to all the, not all, but hundreds and hundreds of businesses in Ottawa. So right now what we're doing is we're sending out our surveys to companies to update all their contact information, all their details to be in the Book of Lists. So please do keep an eye out for emails from our research team. And as well, if you want to be part of the Book of Lists, we encourage everyone to please visit obj.ca/BOL. From there, you can not only read last year's edition, find out more about advertising opportunities, but as well submit your own information to help get your company listed in the Book of Lists.
And you and the team, Peter, have done a great job over the past few years, just adding the market snapshot and the who's who in each sector and that. So it really is a good read. It's a great piece of data, but also a fascinating read. I always say, if people are new to the city and want to learn about it, the business community really quick, I swear there can't be any other better resource. So thank you, Peter. Thank you, Dave. That brings us to the end of the episode. A reminder, you can listen or watch this podcast. If you want to watch it, you can go to our YouTube channel. Be sure to like and subscribe. Click the little bell icon so you know when we're posting new videos. If you're into listening to podcasts, you can do that on popular podcast platforms such as Spotify, Apple, SoundCloud, and Twitch. I encourage everyone to visit obj.ca. That's our website. It's updated regularly each day with some great local business news. And if you never want to miss a headline, the thing to do is to subscribe to OBJ Today email newsletter. And then you'll get a newsletter late afternoon, early evening with all the important headlines of the day. You can sign up, by the way, as you can see if you're watching on screen at obj.ca/newsletter/sign up. On behalf of my colleagues, Peter and Dave, thanks for tuning in. Please stay safe. Hope to see you real soon. Bye-bye.